So welcome to the Performance Management Training for Pulford Community Living Services. My name is Holly Theed, and I'm the training facilitator here at Pulford. I'll be taking you through this 1.5 to 2 hour training that's specific to the process of performance management. We're going to be talking on a whole bunch of different subjects when it comes to applying the performance management model that we have here at Pulford. We're going to be speaking about policies, procedures, and even get into our values and what that means for us. When we hear the word performance, or even the word disciplinary, which you'll be hearing throughout this whole training, we oftentimes attach a negative connotation to that, and it becomes something we don't want to do. So my goal today is to make sure I can shift your perspective. I want you to leave this training today feeling that performance management is good. We need this, and we need it for the growth and development of our staff. That is so important. We cannot see performance management or disciplinary as negative, as a punishment. When we see that, it really disturbs our ideas of growing our staff, because let's put it lightly. If I'm doing the same mistake over and over again, but you're never going to let me know the right way of doing it, how am I ever going to grow? It's impossible. I'll never learn the right way. And how is that fair? So really, applying performance management is fair if it's done in a way that's fair and consistent and professional. So that's what we're going to focus on today. So a question of why are we here? I always like to pose that question when it comes to job responsibilities, because you have made a choice as a leader to be in a position where you would be performing things like disciplinary. So most people, don't feel very comfortable with disciplinary, and you should feel comfortable with it. So I'm hoping by the end of this training that you do. The other side of it is, what is really your purpose? What do you hope to achieve as a leader? So think about that question. Think about your answer. For me as a leader, I hope to really be able to instill growth and ambition in people. I love to see people take on new challenges and succeed and even make mistakes and then recoup from those mistakes. So I find a lot of joy in that as a leader, but your story may be different. But either way, how does your story of why you're here doing this job as a leader relate to performance management? Because it does, believe it or not. And here is just a purpose and outcome. So this is just an outline of what we'll be going through today. There's much more than meets the eye because a lot of conversations will branch off into more different avenues. And we'll get there when we get there. But our focus is going to be on identifying what poor performance looks like, and then how we are going to address that with the person. Incorporating our policies and Pulford values is really important in performance management, and setting out expectations. We're going to go through the process, the responsibility of who does what, and also some progressive disciplinary models. So of what we do here at Pulford, which is actually outlined in our policy. We're going to compose a warning letter as a practice at the end, and I'm going to tell you and share with you how you're going to access your resources. And just up front right now, your biggest resource for performance management is going to be your HR partner and your supervisor. So why should we manage performance? It's a big question. I could give you a lot of reasons why, but I think it's good at this moment to look inside yourself right now and think of yourself as that leader, as that manager, and pose this question of why you think it's a good idea to manage performance on your team. So think about that. Managing performance is about setting expectations. You're going to hear it over and over again in today's training. Why is it important to set expectations? How does your staff team know that they're doing the right thing? How do they know their quality of work is up to par? How do they know that you are happy with your performance? Managing their performance is all part of it. All it is giving and offering feedback to that employee on how they're doing. And sometimes they're doing great, and other times maybe not so much. So the impact of whether you're managing performance or not is huge. So the performance management process is always evolving. It never really stops. Daily, monthly, yearly, and we'll talk about the different ways and things we are doing that will be implemented in the cyclical picture that you see here. So in a situation where we're seeing poor performance on an employee, we're going to be coming up with a plan. So we always got to start with something. Then we're going to have action. So we're actually going to sit down with the employee and discuss what this is going to look like. And then we're going to monitor and observe whether these actions are being implemented by the employee. And always going to be coming back with some feedback as to whether or not that was accomplished. So of course, it's about clarifying expectations, people knowing what their jobs are, what the priorities are, and then having the feedback and coaching is really about improving communication, improving that person's performance. And when you are doing this, you are experiencing opportunities for growth. You're learning about your employees, what their strengths are, what their areas of development are. And so if you're doing this consistently, when it comes to evaluations, they become a real breeze because you already know what your employees are working on. So the big picture. We always like to have a big picture of why we're implementing things in our policy and what this all means for us. So performance management helps us achieve our agency goals and creates an environment where team members receive feedback on their performance, but also assists with tools and resources to help grow and develop our staff team. So again, we're going to be bringing in our values, our policies. Those are all agency related things. It's important to link all those to performance management. In order for us to demonstrate values and mission and vision within an organization, this needs to be very apparent in the way we manage issues in the workplace. Just a little sample of more of a visual too with performance management process. So it is made up of two components when we're measuring performance. It's the what, which are the business goals, and the how, which are the values. That equals performance. So coaching, feedback, performance reviews should account for both aspects. What is the issue? What is our goal? What is our expectation? And how do we demonstrate that? So here is a list of some values. We have our Pulford values and we have our performance values. And they are really both mutually exclusive, which means they work together at the same time. So how we demonstrate our values is how we see our work getting done. When we look at a job-specific performance value such as communication, that has a lot to do with respect. So you can see already, if you're just looking at this list, how you can integrate them and how important it would be to integrate them in order to perform performance management. And we'll look more into this a little bit as we go along here. And when should we be managing performance? All the time. It's like asking the question, when should we give feedback? When should we set goals? All the time. Any opportunity we have. The more opportunities we have, we can create, the more growth we'll have on our team. So let's get into some more time specific stuff. So let's get into the probation period. We have a policy that states the following, but please also know this is the law. This is by Employment Standards of Manitoba. Probation serves as a safeguard for both Pulford and the employee. The probation period is used for evaluating work performance and for serving as an adjustment period for new employees to become familiar in their workplace. All newly hired employees are subject to a probationary period from the date of hire. Permanent appointment as an employee of Pulford is conditional upon satisfactory performance during this probation period. So again, it is so important for you to know that within that 30 days of hire, you are having to do an assessment on this employee. So you must spend as much time with that employee so that you can assess if they are fit for the job. Can they meet expectations? If you spend 4 to 5 shifts with them, you should know, you should have an answer. And by that 30th day, you're either making a decision to continue on with employment or to separate employment with that employee. So in that period of 30 days, if you are having, or the employee's having issues such as arriving to work on time or doing medication, administering medication, and they just can't grasp it, those are moments where you would have to collect your thoughts and say, okay, it's the 28th day, and this person, I've given them multiple chances, or I've set multiple expectations, they're not able to meet them. So that is the 30-day period. Always keep that in mind. Do not forget it, because at the 31st day, basically what will happen is if that employee does decide to leave on their own accord, they have to give us 2 weeks notice. Or if we decide that it's not a fit, then we have to pay out 2 weeks. And that's probably not going to be happening. So be very, very careful and cautious and make sure that you do your assessment within that 30 days of a new hire. So the differences between a low performing, an average, and a high performing employee. This can be debatable. And, I love having this topic in a training to talk about with other people, but here we are, just the 2 of us. So I'm going to try and make sure that I can articulate this to you in the most simple way and form as possible. So I think when we talk about an underperforming employee, we all know what that looks like, right? We've all been there, done that. So somebody who's not showing up on time, who has no care in their work, who maybe has a poor attitude, those are kind of what we see in a low performing employee. In an average performing employee, this is the tricky thing. These are people who do their job. They come, they do their work, and they go home. And that is all we ask of them, right? So the expectations that are outlined in the job description, the things they signed off on, they are doing. They're providing person-centered supports, they're giving medication correctly, they're showing up on time. Those are average performing employees. When we talk about high performing employees, we're talking about people who go outside their job duties to just help out and get things done. So maybe these are the people that come to you and ask you for something to do, more work or some more responsibility. So that's just one example, but I'm sure, and I'm hoping actually that you all have, a high performing employee that you can think of right now to say, yes, I have that person, I have that go-to, and there's potential, right? And a high performing employee, if they're thriving as a support worker, there may be potential for them to thrive as a manager. So maybe it's someone you will mentor. So it's a good thing to think about. There are differences. That's the important thing. So how can we measure somebody's performance? Well, we always start with what expectations have been set for this employee. As a new hire, I can tell you there are several expectations that have been set before you even have the employee training your home. We can start with a pre-screening and a first interview and orientation. All those are done before you're even training the employee. Expectations such as availability, work hours, policies on absenteeism, vacation, codes of conduct, these are all things that are spoken about. So when you actually are training the employee, there's already a bunch of expectations that they have signed off on and have been set by the organization. Your job is to make sure that you're consistently applying the same expectations. So it's important for every manager to review our orientation and review what an employee is signing off on at orientation so that you're familiar with that as well, so that you can continue to implement those expectations and even go beyond that, because now you'll have separate expectations within the home. But see, these expectations that are being set should always be in line with Pulford values as well. So there should be some consistency with those expectations with our values. So here are just some additional tools and strategies that we're going to quickly go through that'll help you manage performance as a leader. So a big one is always documentation. So when we're doing performance, when we're doing any coaching, it's always going to be documented, even before we get to the formal process of performance management. It's important to have that recorded so that if you do end up entering into the disciplinary process, you can revert back to the coaching conversations you had with that staff and what it was about. So when I talked earlier on a little bit about orientation and pre-screen, so before you even see that person in your home, there are set expectations. So they're signing off on policies and job descriptions, and you can use these policies and job descriptions to help manage performance. They're your tool and a resource. So we also have evaluations that we do after 6 months and then annually, where we can set goals and offer feedback and follow up, right? So always knowing if there's a set goal, I'm going to follow up that person and see how they did. Were they successful in meeting that goal? That's really important. And applying performance management is also a tool, right? And meeting the standards of expectations. So all these things together are all tools and strategies and resources that we use as leaders to help us through the performance management process. So one of my favorite things to talk about is linking performance with Pulford's mission, vision, and values. Let's take a look. Our vision is an equal and inclusive world. This is a very meaningful vision for Pulford, and this is what we like to see when we're hiring new staff or even managing staff that we've had for years. How is that team member applying our vision? Are they offering or advocating for an equal and inclusive world? Do they know what inclusivity looks like, what it means? Well, your job as a manager is to make sure that they do, and that you're modeling this for them, and that you're setting this expectation. Our mission: bringing community together to promote and empower people to live a full life. So how is this demonstrated with your employees? Is it demonstrated with your employees? How do you model this behavior? What are the expectations that you set around Pulford's mission? And our values: integrity, dignity, safety, respect. What does that look like? Well, I have a picture for you, but we also have a YouTube video. So I encourage you to watch that video and continue on while we get deeper in our values. Integrity: knowing and doing the right thing, advocating for what's right, and not only that, but taking action. Always offering choices and reducing any barriers. Dignity: everybody has value and worth. This is all about providing privacy for people and treating others equally, no matter what. Safety: providing a culture of security, protection, and comfort. Protection from abuse, neglect, or exploitation, offering constant comfort and care, and offering a sense of personal security and safety. And respect: we honor diversity. We honor everybody, both in the community and in the home, our employees, the people we support, and their families. Giving personal space and respecting personal possessions and privacy is essential. Now let's talk about linking performance with our policy. So now we're going to get into some policies. I'm hoping that you all know about our policies. Maybe not every single Pulford policy, but at least at the minimum, the most important things that you deal with on a day-to-day basis. Absenteeism, punctuality, exchanging days off, leaving the premises, computer usage and cell usage, as well as codes of conduct. So we're going to go into some detail here, so please pay attention. So before we venture too deep into these policies, I'm going to let you know something really important. As of April of 2020, new hires are signing off on these following policies. They are signing that they've read and understand the terms of their job duties. So please know that these expectations have already been set for those staff. Now, for your current staff team, you will have to make sure that these policies are consistently being implemented. So a good way to have these conversations and inform people of the expectations as per policy are discussing these at your meetings, if you're having them monthly or every second month. So it's important to always be talking about things like this. This is an expectation. So here we go into absenteeism. So it is in our policy that notice must be given to the direct supervisor along with an explanation. Now, we prefer phone calls. And of course, the reason we prefer phone calls from our staff is that so we can have an actual conversation. Maybe that conversation is requesting a sick note. Maybe that conversation means, are you going to be in tomorrow? So it's really important to have a two-way conversation. And then how to report this absence. So staff know that they immediately have to notify a supervisor. They have to attempt to find a replacement, and they have to notify their supervisor on whether they do or do not find a replacement. Sufficient notice is noted below. Now, you have to use your discretion as a manager as to when this can be implemented. Not always. If somebody is dealing with a crisis, they may not be able to give you notice of their shift, of not showing up for their shift. So be very flexible and understanding and empathetic in this situation. Punctuality. So basically, late is late. If you show up 1 minute after your shift, 2 minutes, 3 minutes after, you're late. So it's good practice when you're hiring a new employee or you're having staff meetings to remind your staff, come in 5 to 10 minutes prior to your shift, right? What happens is if you come in right at the shift time, that other staff wants to get the heck out of there. They have another job, they have a family, they have school, whatever the case may be. They shouldn't have to stay late, right? So always making sure that you're making that clear with your staff team. And here's the outline if you're going to be late. Everybody signs off on this. Contact your supervisor. Inform them of your arrival and the reason why you're late. Call the home, do the same thing. And when you arrive at the home for work, you call your supervisor and check in. Shift changes. So we do have a policy, it's a vacation policy, which all employees do sign off on. Within that policy, you should note that 2 weeks is required for a time off request. If an employee is requesting time off that is less than 2 weeks notice, they must find a suitable replacement, complete the shift change form, confirm this with the supervisor, so get approval, and then adjust on the schedule. Here is our policy on leaving premises. Employees must not leave their place of work within their scheduled hours unless this is a job requirement or you have authorization from the direct supervisor. So of course, a valid reason for leaving the workplace during work hours would be to support people out in the community. An invalid reason would be to do your personal errands while at work. So we also have a policy on computer and cell phone usage. The use of personal cell phones for personal reasons during work hours is discouraged and should only be limited to matters requiring immediate attention. That comment is at the discretion of the supervisor. So whatever requires immediate attention is used for the discretion of that supervisor. That is you. So at the end of the day, you set the rules in the home. You can have a protocol as to how you manage cell phone use. For example, some homes use the basket method, where you drop your phone in the basket and you check it on your breaks. It is also noted in our policy that employees are never allowed to use their cell phones while driving a motor vehicle on the job. So our policy on codes of conduct is quite lengthy. We're not going to have time to go through all of it today, but I do encourage you to read through the codes of conduct. It is noted that employees are expected to be loyal in their dealings. Constructive feedback about people supported, employees, families, the agency should be communicated directly to that supervisor. And to avoid making any critical remarks about the agency, your work, the people that you work with outside of Paulford. So this is very important policy, and you should really be reading it because there's a lot of behavioral things that will come out of a code of conduct policy. So if you're dealing with some things that are behavioral with an employee, I know a lot of people think, wow, we don't have this in our policy. But we actually do. We have a lot about employee behavior, what is professional, what is ethical. So please do revert back to our code of conduct. And again, all employees sign off on this. So we're going to talk a little bit about the expectations we set at orientation. Again, along with the policies, we talk about hours of work and any changes that will be made. So employees are very aware that they are paid as per the schedule and that they have to initial the schedule in order to get paid. So any changes that are made with work hours have to be reflected on the schedule. So examples such as arriving late, leaving early, being absent, or any changes that they made with another staff must be reflected on the schedule and initialed. And cross-training. So it is your job as a manager to advocate for someone if they want more shifts or need more shifts. So here's the kind of tricky part. We tell staff in our orientation they are not allowed to reach out to other homes, because that will happen where they may be looking for more shifts and want to work at that home. That becomes a potentially dangerous situation, because then you have people who are choosing one home over another, right? And it can as far go to where that person starts to transfer themselves out of your home into another home. So you have to lead this process. You have to be the person who makes those connections for that person and sets up that training. Now, after that training, if you decide to set it up, you have to monitor that and have that constant communication, which means that the onus is now on the staff. So they have to communicate with you if or when they're going to be picking up more shifts in another home. And let's keep this to maximum 2 homes, because it can get out of control really fast. And let's not advocate for someone to work at multiple homes if they're already working a lot of hours at your home. A part-timer cannot be working full-time hours. I believe we have something in place that's about 20 to 30 hours a week. You can check with your program coordinator, but we do have to follow that protocol and procedure. So really important, don't be advocating for someone to work outside your department if they're already meeting their quota of hours in your department. And even if they're not on the schedule, but they're picking up a whole bunch of shifts, don't let go of that. Make sure that you still have access to that employee. So here are just some examples of unapproved absences. So an unapproved absence would be punctuality, leaving premises, absenteeism, all those 3 policies that we went through. If somebody doesn't give a reason why they were absent, pattern absences, or just failing to attend the mandatory meetings. And how do we manage performance? So this section, we're going to get into the what to do's, what not to do's in managing performance. As promised, here is our disciplinary strategy, really. This is what we actually have this in our policy, not this diagram, but we have this written out as our approach. So of course our goal is to try and coach. Not all things are coachable, and we use our discretion as a manager in that way to go, okay, well, this isn't something I can coach. I got to go right to a verbal warning. So as much as we have this great strategy and this approach, there are times where we're just not going to be able to follow it. Let's be honest. If there's gross misconduct, we're jumping maybe to right at termination, which isn't even on here. We'll call that step 5. But so it's always using your discretion, right? Like I said earlier, every situation is different. Really, no 2 situations are the same. So making sure that we know that this isn't just we use this no matter what, right? We have to be flexible, but it is generally how things go. So with someone, let's say for example, who is late, we're going to coach them. We're going to spend some time digging into the whys and what happened and how we're going to get to better. And after that, if it still becomes a problem, then we go into a verbal warning. After that, most punctuality issues won't happen again, right? If they do, we're going to a written warning. So this is, the approach of when a situation like that happens, right? So that's just an example. So corrective action types. You'll need to know this in order to properly write a performance management letter. On our templates, you'll have a choice to call the action performance, conduct, or attendance. And then we'll talk a little bit later here on these slides about what these all mean, how to differentiate from one to another, because there could be a little bit of crossover. You could be dealing with two different things. So we're going to go through some examples of performance, conduct, and attendance. A team member who is found using profanity directed at their coworkers would be a conduct issue. Failing to notify the leader of not coming into work is attendance. Making inappropriate racial and sensitive remarks is conduct. Creating a hostile work environment is conduct. Not following the 20-step medication administration is performance. Ignoring poor employee behavior and not effectively managing a team is performance. Using profanity during a team meeting, conduct. And when performance is below standard and this team member is not filling out documentation correctly or not signing off, performance. Consistently being late for work and leaving before the end of the shift is attendance. And getting angry at another team member, yelling in the home, using harsh, inappropriate language is conduct. So I think it's pretty clear if you get a good look at this and understand, I know attendance is very clear, but it's really conduct and performance that sometimes we get a little mixed up on. So if you go back to the duties of the job and measure performance by the duties, that's easy for performance, right? So doing the training that we have for medication, individual spending, any errors in that is directly performance. Let's say providing person-centered supports, that's performance, right? Conduct is more behaviors, poor attitude, bad decisions that are made that are communicative, that can be conduct. Another tip on providing feedback when it comes to performance management would be to not be reactive. So prior to even engaging in that conversation, please consider the following. Seek to understand. So be curious about what happened. Don't go into accusation mode. Don't make judgments. Don't make assumptions. Maybe this person has done that before and they said this and this is probably the same thing that happened, or, it's just really unhealthy and that person's lost. And then the disciplinary becomes a punishment, right? So you can't assume the worst out of people. You have to assume the best. And when you have that perspective, that's when you should enter performance management. So be curious what happened. Lean in. So it's always important to talk about it with your peers. On Fridays, you have time where you get to see a lot of people in the office. So that's a great time to take advantage of talking about some, performance situations that you're having. Oftentimes, when we're tied up in something, we're not seeing the clear picture. We are emotional creatures. We have feelings. Our feelings get hurt. We get offended. So we have to be able to separate that from our conversation in performance management, right? So oftentimes just talking with someone to be your sounding board is a really great way to focus on the actual issue at hand. And asking yourself, did I set the expectation? So was the expectation set? When was it set? Who set it? How many times? Does the team member know that they're in violation? That they didn't follow the expectation? Did they understand that this is a policy or a rule? So it's important to remember, I have a little comment here, it is the management's responsibility to demonstrate that the employee knew the rule or policy. That is very important. You cannot assume anything. We've said that already. So make sure that if you're a new manager or you're taking over a new department, that you know these employees know this. You can't guess, you can't assume. So be sure that, yes, I set the expectation, I set it in a staff meeting, everybody signed. That's what you need. Was the policy or rule consistently and fairly enforced by management? So as I went off on the other slide a little bit long, as I sometimes tend to, I talked a lot about being consistent and fair. You cannot treat people differently when it comes to performance management. Really, when it comes to being a manager at all, in a lot of ways, right? So rewards and recognition and performance management both. You have to be fair and consistent because people will pick up on when you're not. And hopefully they'll call you out. So does management have a history of ignoring these behaviors or singling out team members? So I would say this is really important. If you are taking over another department or you're a new manager, you don't always know how things ran before. So you can make a new start, right? The same thing goes if you do this training and you say, I'm going to start implementing the policy. I'm going to start implementing some performance management. I'm going to start coaching, whatever you're getting from this, which I really hope you are. You can do that. It can be different from what you did before, right? It just can't be up and down and up and down. So if you choose to come out of this training and start implementing punctuality because you have an issue with punctuality in your home and it's just been flying by and no one's really saying anything and you're a little bit fearful and you want to keep your staff, and now you've done this training and wow, I've developed confidence and there's a policy and there's these values and I feel good about this now and it's helping these people, right? If you can change that perspective, like I said in the beginning, and come out of this ahead, you can change your behavior, right? You can. You just can't go back and forth. So was the team member aware that violating the rule or policy could lead to further consequences? So this is more about that, how you end the conversation. So you're sitting in a coaching and sometimes this is an awkward moment because you say, well, I don't want to threaten them. And it's not about threatening anyone. Look, if you do this again, this is going to happen. It's more about delivering it in a fashion that we can't have people late at work. When you're late at work, it does this, this, and this. If you continue to be late at work, we're going to have a different conversation. So what can you do to be on time? That's more about what I'm talking about, not a threat of if you do this again, you're going to get written up. That's punishment. You've just defaulted again, right? So making sure that you're working with that person is always really important. So it's important to also take into account the seriousness or severity of the situation. You could also look at the repercussions of the incident because sometimes that could change the severity. So being a few minutes late or somebody stealing $5 from petty cash, very different. So the consequences should be different. And as I said before, the whole, what did the infraction cause? What issues resulted because of that? There could be some serious issues, or maybe not. So always make sure you consider the infraction as a whole. So looking for any provocation is really important in the situation of performance management. Was this person provoked in any way to demonstrate the poor conduct, let's say, that they did? Let's say they screamed or yelled or acted rudely. It is not an excuse for that behavior, but it will play a role in the performance management process. Maybe the severity will change. Maybe it'll go from a written or a verbal to a coaching. So it's important to know the situation that was going on at the time that the infraction happened. It's also important to know because maybe there was another peer, another team member involved in this, and maybe that performance management needs to be extended to that team member as well. And also something to consider would be your role. So what is your role as a manager? Well, your role is to model behavior, right? So you're being watched, you're on display. The things you do are going to make a difference. So if you're going to have bad behavior, and you're going to be swearing or cursing, you're going to be yelling, you're going to be abusing your cell phone, things like that will be picked up on by your staff. They're mentoring you. So they're going to follow suit. And you cannot say, you cannot do this, you cannot do this, and you cannot do this, and then go ahead and do it, right? We know that. So please be careful in what you are communicating with your staff, especially when you don't know you're doing it. Really important. And the history of the employee. So I think this is really important. So, for new managers or people who have been transferred into another home, it's important to know the history of the employee before you enter into the disciplinary process. Because if you do, that's great because it's right in here. You got some coaching notes and things like that. You can go into the employee files, right? You have access to that through the front. So always making sure that you're checking those and cross-referencing them before you're giving another warning. Because for all you know, you're a new manager and that person had a written warning 3 weeks ago, right? So we always have to take that into consideration. But also the flip side to that is historically, if I have a really good performing employee and I've never had any issues, and all of a sudden I start getting multiple issues, like their work is starting to, fall to the side, they're late, they just seem like blasé, they don't really care. I wouldn't go into a frenzy of I'm gonna have to implement performance management. I would go to seek to understand. So I don't want to know what's happened. Like obviously something is happening. This is not normal for this person. So it's about being empathetic and understanding and curious and wanting to help and get them to better, right? That's what we're always trying to do. So this is a no contact, no show. This is in our policy. Step by step, we're going to go through how to handle situations like this. They happen, unfortunately. It is not uncommon. So we're going to make sure that you have a good understanding of how to work through these scenarios. So first, putting our thinking cap on in performance management, we're talking about doing your research, seeking to understand, not making any assumptions, right? So when someone doesn't show up for their shift, it should be a shocker, right? No matter who it is, it should be, oh my goodness, this person didn't show up for work. Like think about flip side. What if you just didn't show up? What if you said to your manager, to your supervisor, I'm coming to the office today. I got work to do. I'll meet you at 2 and then I have a staff meeting at 3 and you just don't show up. What would happen? Well, we're going to go through what would happen. The first thing I would do is I would call that person to say, what's going on? Where are you? Are you okay? My assumption when somebody, and I will make an assumption, this is a positive assumption. If someone does not show up for work, something happened. And it could very well be something bad. So I want to check in and do my due diligence and make sure they're okay. So I don't rush to negative, right? I don't rush to, they didn't come in, lazy bums, or, I knew they wouldn't come in because they had to do this job, or they had to report to the hospital. I knew they weren't going to show up. Well, if you knew that, then you should have done something about it prior to this happening, right? So think about your own language, think about your own thoughts, and check in, right? And go in with a good frame of mind. So seek to understand. If the absence is unsubstantiated in your own, judgment, or you don't get a response, you need to follow our policy. So a lot of times I'm going to go off the example of you don't get a response because that commonly does happen. So let's walk through. So here is the first attempt. So when you have a staff who is a no-show and does not contact anybody, you're going to call, text, email, leave a message if you can. Give the number to call back at, and then you're going to document this. Then you're going to make a second attempt. This is within 24 hours. So I would say for sure by the next morning, okay? You're going to call, text, email, leave message when you can with the number to call back. You're going to document. In addition to your second attempt, you are going to have to make contact with their emergency contact. If you make contact with their emergency contact, you have to let them know that that person is their emergency contact, that they have not reported to work. This is my name, this is my number, please call me if you hear anything. If you do not make contact with that person, then you just don't, right? But you tried, so you document it. Then you report this issue to HR. So HR jointly with you will start to prepare a job abandonment letter to be emailed or couriered out the same day. So this is the third and last attempt that is again done within 24 hours. You will follow the same protocol by calling and trying to connect with this employee and documenting this. Then you will join forces with Human Resources again to create a second and last job abandonment letter. This letter will be different, whereas there will be a set deadline for the employee to respond by. And neglect to respond by that deadline will end in termination. So please be careful, because once this letter is released and that person does not meet the deadline, they are not working for Pulford anymore. So it is good to keep the communication going with your human resource business partner. So in the function of performance management, it's really important not just to know what your role is, but what about everybody else? So let's go through what that's going to look like in the performance management process. So the role of human resources is to provide advice, support, training to managers on ways of dealing with poor performance, including all written letters. Human resources is ensuring fair and consistent approaches in performance management as well. They regularly review and monitor the effectiveness of the performance improvement process and, of course, the policies. They ensure compliance with the applicable legal obligation and employment laws. And they also provide support to all employees about their policies on performance management and just their experience on performance management. And then here you are as a leader. What is your role? Well, it's to implement performance management and to be consistent and fair. It's to ensure that team members understand our performance management process. It is also important that you ensure that team members understand the standards that are expected. So again, what are the expectations? And to offer timely feedback on performance, both formally and informally. And last but not least, as a leader, you need to make sure you are consulting with the human resource business partner and your supervisor to ensure that you are partaking in the performance improvement process, following policies and procedures. As a team member, their role is to be aware of the performance improvement process and be open to hearing feedback, understanding that performance expectations and the result of not performing their job. And a team member must seek appropriate help and support when they're experiencing difficulties, and to cooperate fully in the performance improvement process and work jointly together to seek improvement for their performance. And some common pitfalls we're going to talk about in administering performance improvement. So failure to enforce the rules consistently is a problem. We know that. We talked about that. And of course, lack of consistency and fairness. So not applying the same rules, changing how you apply the rules to who. Time efficiency. So it's not fair to say that you're going to expect someone to improve their performance overnight, right? Behaviors take time. So please note that the time frame that you're giving employees must be fair as well. Lack of documentation. So it's important that when you come to your team members, whether it be HR or your supervisor, you must have documentation. They can't just be all in your head and you think when this happened, why it happened. You actually have to have some things written down. And you have to be able to perform a thorough and complete investigation. Sometimes you do need to do investigations, but you can't have a lot of judgment and assumptions when you're going to be entering an investigation. Always giving the employee the right to share. That's really important. That is a right. That is a freedom. So being able to give the employee time and space, even if you believe, it's a bunch of excuses, it's their story and you owe them that. So give them that space so that they can share their explanation. And it's important not to make any mistakes in writing those disciplinary letters. They are in writing their documentation, they go into the employee file. That employee gets a copy of that. So making sure that there are no errors. And to avoid that, you just need to communicate and get sign off and permission from your coordinator and human resources. And don't make the assumption, right? So we talked about this a lot, is not just assuming that this person was trying to do a bad job or not assuming that they did this. It's doing a thorough investigation. And always making sure that you step away from the situation and talk it through with somebody else before taking action. So the worst thing you could do is have an emotional reaction and get upset and mad at somebody. You cannot properly critically think when you're emotionally attached to a situation. So being able to step outside and detach from that. So now we're going to enter the disciplinary process. We're going to go into a formal letter. So we're going to draft it. We're going to discuss this issue, this letter, with our coordinator, with our direct supervisor. Then we're going to submit this draft to Human Resources for approval. So HR is going to make sure that the letter has the key factors that are needed in the letter. They're not going to necessarily look at how you spelt a word. It's your job to make sure that you spell check the letter and that all the necessary information is there as well. So if there's any necessary changes, you'll be asked to make those changes. And then we're going to schedule a meeting with the employee. So if this is going to be a verbal, this meeting can be just had with you and that employee. Anything above a verbal will require Human Resources business partner. Then you're going to have both the PC and HR initial the copy of the letter prior to the delivery of the letter. That's your okay, right? If that can't be done, then you need to get something on an email. I would suggest something in documentation to say it's good to go. If the meeting does not go well, so this means if the employee does not take accountability, or if they don't sign the letter, either or, you need to make sure you come back to HR and your PC and let them know. because basically what that means, that did not go well, right? If this person did not, they negated any accountability, that's a problem. And we may have to revisit that with that person. So that would be what we would call an unsuccessful meeting, and there would most likely be some follow-up. So again, important to communicate that. So every warning letter that we do has these same elements, no matter what stage. We're going to talk about the history of the recent performance conversations. So anytime we do a letter, this should be included. Was it a coaching, or maybe we already had a verbal written letter and now this is a second written? So always having to go back on, hey, we had a conversation already about this, right? And then we're going to talk about the key areas of improvement. So this is specific to the example of the behavior that was demonstrated, right? So this is the behavior that we want to correct. So we're going to give that example of what we saw. And then we're also going to talk about the results of that, because the results, as we mentioned earlier, could be pretty severe results of their poor conduct. And then the expectation. So we're always going to have, going forward, this is the expectation. This is what we want to see. This is the correction, right? So giving that employee the information they need to get to better. It's always good to prepare for the delivery of a warning letter. And the best people that you can speak to are your supervisor and your HR team. So we're just going to talk about the basic principles. First and foremost, the meeting should be positive. If you're carrying something in that meeting, check in and make sure you leave it at the door. So this is supposed to be a positive experience for both you and the team member. So make sure at the beginning of the meeting you set the tone. You remind that person of why they're here. You thank them for coming in. And you share with them what the next step is in this process. And explain to them that this isn't a punishment process. This is a process in which Paulford has in place to improve team members' performance. Describe the problem and be specific. So in your letter, it should be very specific as what you saw as the demonstrated behavior that you want to see improvement on. Describe the expected performance or conduct. So here's what I'm seeing specifically. Here's what I should or need to be seeing, right? And then explain the consequences. So the consequences is a two-part. The consequences of their behavior and how it affected maybe the team or the people they support, and the consequences if there's no change. Also set timelines and follow-up. So nobody can change their behavior overnight. So, we're going to watch this and I'm going to observe you in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And then I'm going to come and see you at the end of that 2 and 3 weeks. And we're going to talk about the follow-up and what's going to happen next. And then that employee is going to sign off on the document and get a copy of the document. Make sure that if the employee disagrees or does not sign, that they still know that this is going into their employee file. And then you communicate that with your HR partner. Here's just a quick YouTube video of how to deliver a performance improvement plan or disciplinary, so you can watch that at your discretion. When you are considering terminating an employee, you must have that conversation with the HR partner. Certain things will have to be discussed, such as, has there been sufficient documentation? Has the team member improved their performance? Are you providing clear, fair, and consistent messaging? And have we exhausted everything else? Have we gone down the road of disciplinary with the written letters? Have we established a strong paper trail? Did this person or does this person know that their job is in jeopardy? Have they had opportunities to succeed? Did you give fair timelines? And maybe we even have to consider some legal advice. So do always make sure when you're even considering termination that you have that conversation with your HR partner. Our policy has numerous amounts of information, reasons to terminate somebody. So of course, gross misconduct is on here, everything from abuse and neglect, medication errors, falsifying documentation, your conduct being unprofessional or unethical, breach of agency policy procedures. I think a lot of like privacy and confidentiality are some issues. Failure to write IRs, failure to perform the duties within your job description, any serious conflicts of interest, which I mean, the list goes on, right? So there's a lot of reasons that we have in our policy for termination. And then last but not least, we have a management toolkit that Human Resources have put together for all supervisors who perform disciplinary. And the toolkit is a great resource of information. If you need any help navigating through the toolkit, you can connect with your HR partner. So some takeaway tips. I always like to ask people, well, what did you get from this? But I'm just going to assume that you're shouting these out. So how to access resources and tools, how to document and write a disciplinary letter, how to measure employee performance, what to do when a team member does not show up for work, the importance of setting clear expectations, how to effectively handle poor performance, and how to change behavior and improve performance. So you've almost completed the training. That's exciting. But before we end, there are some things that you need to do. And one of those is just a test. So there'll be a test that will be provided to you with this training, as well as an evaluation on this training. So we can, get some feedback as to what we're doing right and maybe some improvements we could be making in training. And also a practice. So we're going to ask that you go through the next slide with the 5 scenarios, and you're just going to write out and answer the questions. And last but not least, practice writing a disciplinary letter. So take one of those scenarios, take a disciplinary letter template that you have access to, and use that as an example. So you might have to make up some information, and that's fine. You're not being graded on that. It's just a practice to be comfortable with writing disciplinary letters. You can take the practice, the evaluation, and the test, and all that could be submitted back to me, Holly Thede, training facilitator here at Pulford. Here are the 5 questions that you can go through and write down a step-by-step process of the actions that you would take.